They didn't eat steak under the stars, not the way Hollywood wants you to believe. Out on the open range, where dust clung to your skin and the horizon never seemed to end, cowboys survived on something far simpler and far stranger. Meals weren't about comfort, they were about survival. What they ate had to last, had to travel, had to endure the unforgiving rhythm of the trail. And the truth is, some of these foods would shock you today. This wasn't the Wild West of legend. This was the Wild West as it really was. Welcome to the World Tapestry, where we uncover the stories history quietly left behind. Number 1. Sourdough starter, the Cowboy's lifeline. It might sound simple, just flour and water left to sit. But to a cowboy, sourdough starter was something close to gold. Out on long cattle drives that stretched for months, fresh bread was nearly impossible to come by. There were no bakeries, no steady supplies, just what a man could carry with him. So instead, cowboys carried something alive. A fermented mixture, carefully protected, sometimes even kept warm at night to keep it from dying in the cold. From this, they made bread, biscuits, even flapjacks. Day after day, the same starter fed them, as long as they kept it alive. But here's the part most people don't realize. Some cowboys named their sourdough starters. They treated them like companions, like something that had to survive, just like they did. Because if your starter died, a piece of your survival went with it. And in a land where everything could be taken from you, even something as small as fermented dough could mean the difference between eating and going hungry. And yet, even with something as valuable as sourdough, it wasn't always enough to keep a cowboy fed, because most days, what they ate was far tougher and far less forgiving. Number 2, salt pork, not fresh meat. You might picture a cowboy slicing into a fresh, juicy steak by the fire, but the reality was far less appetizing. Out on the trail, fresh meat spoiled quickly under the relentless sun. There were no ice boxes, no refrigeration, only time working against you. So instead, cowboys relied on something far more durable, salt pork. Thick cuts of pork, packed heavily in salt, cured until they could last for weeks, sometimes months. It was tough, overpoweringly salty, and often the same meal, day after day. Before cooking, it had to be soaked to remove some of the salt, but even then, the taste lingered. Still, it provided what they needed most, fat calories and survival. Many cowboys grew tired of it quickly. Some even dreaded mealtime, knowing exactly what would be waiting. Because out here, food wasn't about enjoyment. It was about endurance. And if salt pork was repetitive, what came next was even more relentless. Number 3, beans. Every single day, there's a reason beans became a symbol of the Old West. Because for cowboys, they were nearly impossible to escape. Cheap, easy to carry, and packed with energy, beans were the backbone of trail cooking. Sacks of dried beans sat in chuck wagons, ready to be boiled hour after hour over an open fire. Morning, noon, night, it didn't matter. Beans were always there. Cooked slowly, sometimes with bits of salt pork for flavor, they filled the stomach but rarely excited the senses. And here's what most people don't realize. Cowboys joked about beans constantly, not because they loved them, but because they were tired of them. The monotony was real. Imagine eating the same meal every day for months. Yet they kept eating because beans were reliable. And on the trail, reliability meant survival. But even beans had competition from something far harder and far less forgiving. Number 4, hardtack. If there was one food that truly tested a cowboy's patience, it was hardtack. Simple in ingredients, just flour, water, and sometimes salt. It was baked until it became rock solid. Not crispy, not crunchy, but nearly unbreakable. Designed to last for months without spoiling, it was more tool than food. Cowboys often dipped it in coffee or stew just to soften it enough to chew. Even then, it could crack teeth if you weren't careful. And the shocking part? Hardtack sometimes came with unwanted extras, tiny insects that found their way inside during storage. Most cowboys didn't bother removing them. They simply ate, because throwing food away wasn't an option. Out here, you didn't complain, you adapted. And to wash it down, they turned to something even stronger. Number 5, Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. If there was one comfort Cowboys refused to give up, it was coffee. But this wasn't the mild brew you might drink today. This was something else entirely. Ground coffee beans tossed straight into boiling water, cooked over an open fire until it became thick, dark, and incredibly strong. Some said it was strong enough to float a horseshoe or stand a spoon upright. They drank it in the morning to wake up, at midday to keep going, and at night to unwind by the fire. Sometimes it even replaced water, which wasn't always safe to drink. And in a life filled with dust, exhaustion, and repetition, coffee became more than a drink. It was ritual. It was comfort. It was one small piece of consistency in an unpredictable world. Because when everything else changed, that tin cup of coffee remained the same. But even coffee couldn't hide the truth that some of the meals Cowboys ate would surprise you even more. Number 6. Chuckwagon, son of a gun stew. There was no such thing as waste on the trail. Not when survival depended on every last scrap. Son of a gun stew wasn't a fancy dish. It was necessity in its rawest form. Made from leftover animal parts, organs, marrow, scraps most people would throw away, it was tossed into a pot and slow-cooked over the fire. Whatever was available went in. To modern ears, it sounds unthinkable. But to a cowboy, it was a meal. The chuckwagon cook had one job: stretch what little they had to feed many. And this stew did exactly that, filling, rich, and packed with nutrients, even if the taste wasn't always comforting. Some cowboys came to depend on it, even appreciate it. Because out here, you didn't eat with preference. You ate with gratitude. And if nothing went to waste, then even the toughest meat had its place. Number 7. Dry beef. Long before jerky came in seal packets, cowboys were chewing on something far tougher. Fresh beef didn't last long under the blazing sun, so it had to be preserved. Strips of meat were salted and hung to dry in the open air, turning into something hard, chewy, and built to last. It wasn't tender. It wasn't flavorful in the way we expect today, but it could survive the journey. Cowboys would chew on it for hours while riding, sometimes not even stopping for a proper meal. It became more than food, it became fuel. And here's the reality most don't picture. It could be so tough, it felt like chewing leather. But when it was all you had, you didn't complain. You kept chewing. And when they finally stopped for a hot meal, it often came in a much simpler form. Number 8. Flapjacks cooked over open fires. At sunrise, before the long ride began, there is often one small comfort waiting by the fire. Flapjacks, made from simple ingredients: flour, water, sometimes a bit of lard. These pancakes were quick, filling, and easy to prepare on a flat iron skillet. No syrup, no fruit toppings, just plain, golden cakes cooked over open flames. They weren't indulgent, but they were warm, and that mattered. After cold nights and early mornings, Flapjacks offered something rare on the trail: a moment of normalcy. A quiet reminder of home, of kitchens left behind. But even this comfort had its limits, because without sweetness or variety, even Flapjacks became just another routine. Still, for a brief moment each morning, they felt like something more. And when supplies ran thin, cowboys had to look beyond the wagon. Number 9. Prairie chicken. Out on the open land, food wasn't always guaranteed, so sometimes you had to hunt for it. Prairie chickens, along with other wild birds, became an unexpected source of fresh meat. Cowboys would take aim whenever they had the chance, cooking their catch right there over the fire. It was one of the few times they tasted something truly fresh, but it wasn't reliable. Some days you caught something, other days you didn't. And that uncertainty made every successful hunt feel like a small victory. The truth is, cowboys weren't living off cattle the way people imagine. Most of the time, they couldn't afford to. So when wild game appeared, it was a rare break from the ordinary. And even when meat was scarce, they still found a way to make something from nothing. Number 10. Gravy made from almost nothing. Sometimes there wasn't much left in the wagon, but somehow, a meal still had to be made. That's where gravy came in. Using leftover fat, a bit of flour, and water, cowboys created a thick, simple sauce poured over biscuits, beans, or whatever else was available. No meat, no rich stock, just ingenuity. It sounds basic, but it changed everything. Because when your meals were dry, repetitive, and bland, even a little gravy made them easier to swallow. And that's what mattered. This wasn't about flavor. It was about survival, about stretching the smallest ingredients into something that felt like a complete meal. Because out on the trail, you didn't need perfection. You just needed enough. And yet, every now and then, there was something that felt almost like real comfort food. Number 11. Biscuits baked in Dutch ovens. Every now and then, something close to real comfort appeared on the trail. Biscuits, soft, warm, and freshly baked, were made using heavy cast-iron Dutch ovens buried beneath hot coals. It took time, patience, and skill. But when done right, the result was something rare in a cowboy's life. Bread that felt like home. Flour, lard, water, that was often all it took. And yet, those simple biscuits carried something deeper. A reminder of kitchens left behind, of families, of a life that felt far away. But moments like these didn't last long, because on the trail, comfort was always temporary. And when it came to sweetness, even the smallest taste felt like a luxury. Number 12. Molasses as a sweet luxury. Sugar was scarce, but sweetness still found its way in. Molasses, dark, thick, and rich, was one of the few sweeteners cowboys had access to. A small drizzle over biscuits or flapjacks could transform an ordinary meal into something special. But it was used sparingly. Supplies were limited, and every drop mattered. For many cowboys, molasses was the closest thing they had to dessert. It wasn't candy, it wasn't indulgent, but in a life filled with plain, repetitive meals, it felt like a reward. And when variety appeared, it often came sealed inside a can. Number 13. Canned tomatoes. Heavy, bulky, and difficult to transport. Canned goods weren't common on long drives, but when they showed up, they changed everything. Tomatoes, in particular, brought something the cowboy diet desperately lacked: flavor. A bit of acidity, a hint of freshness, something different. They were added to stews, beans, or eaten on their own. And for a brief moment, the monotony broke. But because of their weight, they were used carefully, saved for when they were needed most. Because out here, variety was rare. And sometimes, even simpler foods took their place. Number 14. Corn dodgers, fried cornmeal cakes. Corn dodgers were made from cornmeal mixed with water, shaped by hand, and fried in whatever grease was available. No seasoning, no extras, just sustenance. They were easy to carry, easy to make, and often eaten alongside beans or salt pork. But here's the reality. They were dry, crumbly, and not exactly enjoyable. Yet they did their job, because on the trail, food didn't have to be good. It just had to keep you going. And keeping going often meant facing something less talked about. Number 15. Water that wasn't always safe. Clean water wasn't guaranteed. Streams, rivers, and watering holes could be contaminated by animals, by mud, by whatever the trail had carried into them. Cowboys drank it anyway, because they had to, but often they turned to something else instead. Coffee. Boiled, hot, and safer than questionable water, it became the drink of choice. The shocking truth? Some cowboys trusted coffee more than water itself. Because out here, survival meant making the safest choice available, even if it wasn't ideal. And every drop of fat, every bit of grease, became just as valuable. Number 16. Bacon grease as cooking gold. Nothing was wasted. After cooking salt pork or bacon, the leftover grease was carefully saved, poured into tins, reused again and again. It became the base for nearly every meal. Beans were cooked in it. Corn dodgers were fried in it. Even biscuits depended on it. It added flavor. It added calories. And most importantly, it stretched limited supplies. Without bacon grease, many meals would have been nearly inedible. Because in a world of scarcity, even grease became treasure. And when something fresh appeared, it changed everything. Number 17. Wild game like rabbit and venison. Despite being surrounded by cattle, cowboys rarely ate beef from the herd they were driving. Instead, fresh meat came from the land. Rabbits, deer, whatever could be hunted along the way. It wasn't consistent, but when it happened, it was a welcome change. Fresh meat meant flavor, tenderness, something different from the usual dryness of preserved food. But it required time, skill, and luck. And luck wasn't always on their side. So when freshness faded, preservation took over again. Number 18. Vinegar for preservation and flavor. Sharp, sour, and surprisingly important. Vinegar was used to help preserve food and to cut through the heaviness of salty, greasy meals. A splash here, and there could bring life back into something otherwise bland. It wasn't a luxury, it was a tool. And in a diet where flavor was limited, even something as simple as vinegar made a difference. Still, there were moments when something familiar appeared. Number 19. Potatoes, when available, a rare comfort. Potatoes were heavy. That alone made them difficult to carry on long cattle drives. But when they were available, they became one of the most appreciated foods on the trail. Boiled, fried, or tossed into stews, they added substance, texture, and a sense of familiarity. They felt normal, and that mattered more than anything. Because sometimes a simple potato could remind a cowboy of a life far from the dust and distance. And then, there were foods you might not expect at all. Number 20. Simple rice dishes, unexpected staple. It wasn't the first thing you'd associate with the Wild West. But rice had its place on the trail. Lightweight, affordable, and easy to store, rice became a practical addition to chuckwagon meals. Cooked in large pots, it stretched ingredients further, feeding more people with less. It wasn't flavorful on its own, but it didn't need to be. It served a purpose, and that was enough. Because out here, every meal was about survival first, and everything else second. But even with all these staples, some of the most surprising foods were still yet to come. Number 21. Chili without beans, early trail versions. It wasn't the chili you know today. No beans, no thick sauce, no rich toppings. Early cowboy chili was something much simpler and much harsher. Dried meat, crushed peppers, maybe a bit of fat, all boiled together into a thin, spicy mixture. It was quick to make, easy to stretch, and strong enough to wake up even the most exhausted rider. The heat masked the taste of preserved meat, and for a moment, it felt like something different. But the truth is, this wasn't comfort food. It was survival disguised as flavor. And yet, in that thin, fiery stew, you can still trace the roots of a dish that would one day define an entire culture. And while some meals were built on spice, others depended on something much simpler. Number 22. Onions as the only fresh ingredient. Fresh food didn't last long on the trail. Except for one thing. Onions. They could survive the heat, the movement, the time. Carried in sacks, they lasted far longer than most vegetables, becoming one of the only reliable sources of freshness. Sliced into beans, fried in grease, eaten alongside meat. They added sharpness, a bite, a reminder that not everything had to taste the same. For many cowboys, onions were the closest thing they had to fresh produce for weeks at a time. And in a world of dried and salted food, that small bit of freshness mattered more than you'd think. But not everything was cooked over a fire. Number 23. Trail mixed-style snacks, dried fruit and nuts. Sometimes there was no time to stop. Long hours in the saddle meant eating on the move, and that required something quick, portable, and reliable. Cowboys carried small amounts of dried fruit, nuts, and other preserved snacks tucked into their gear. It wasn't a full meal, but it kept them going. A handful here, a bite there, just enough to push through the day. And while it may sound familiar to us now, back then it wasn't a trend. It was necessity, because stopping meant losing time, and losing time meant falling behind. And as the trail stretched across the Southwest, another influence quietly shaped what they ate. Number 24. Flour tortillas. The image of cowboy food is often painted as purely American, but that's not the full story. Much of what cowboys ate was influenced by Mexican vaqueros, the original cowhands of the region. And one of their lasting contributions was the flour tortilla. Simple, flexible, and easy to carry, tortillas became a practical alternative to bread. They could be wrapped around beans, meat, or anything available, creating quick, portable meals. And unlike biscuits or hardtack, they didn't crumble or break. Some of the most American cowboy traditions didn't start in America at all. They were shared, adapted, and carried forward. And sometimes, even survival came with a cost. Number 25. Spoiled food. Because there was no choice. Not every meal was safe. Under the heat of the sun and the length of the journey, food sometimes spoiled. Meat turned, supplies went bad, and the line between edible and dangerous blurred. But out on the trail, you didn't always have the luxury of throwing things away. Cowboys ate what they had, sometimes scraping off the worst parts, sometimes cooking it longer, sometimes just hoping for the best. Hunger often outweighed caution, because when your body needed fuel and there was nothing else left, you took the risk. The Wild West wasn't built on legendary feasts or endless steaks by the fire. It was built on endurance, on resourcefulness, on meals that were simple, repetitive, and sometimes unforgiving. But within those meals, there were stories. Stories of survival, of adaptation, of people doing whatever it took to make it through another day on the open range. And maybe that's what makes this history so powerful. Not what they ate, but how they endured. If you enjoyed uncovering these forgotten pieces of the past, make sure to subscribe to the World Tapestry, where every story is a thread in the fabric of history. Until next time, stay curious,